The day my father announced the family trip to Italy, I was standing in the kitchen doorway holding a bowl of pasta I just made for everyone. 32 people packed into my parents' dining room, aunts, uncles, cousins, my sister's fiancé, and his entire family, all of them cheering and clapping and lifting their glasses. My mother was crying happy tears. My sister was already pulling up flights on her phone. And I stood there with a ceramic bowl in both hands, completely still, because my father had just finished his announcement by turning to me in front of everyone and saying, "And Claire will hold things down here. Someone has to be the responsible one. Lord knows she doesn't have anywhere else to be." Laughter. Actual laughter. Not mean laughter, which somehow would have been easier to process. Just easy, comfortable laughter, the kind that comes when something lands is obviously true. My aunt patted my arm on her way to the dessert table. My cousin gave me a sympathetic smile that lasted less than a second before she turned back to ask about hotel rooms. My sister didn't look up from her phone. I set the bowl on the counter. I smiled. I said something like "of course" and went to refill the bread basket because that is what I had always done. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. I was not blindsided that night. Not really. My father saying that out loud in front of everyone was new, that specific flavor of humiliation, the public performance of it, the laughter that was new. But the underlying message was not. I had been receiving that message my entire life in 1,000 smaller ways, and I had been accepting it for just as long. I am 29 years old. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration and a paralegal certificate. I finish nights and weekends while working full-time. I am not dramatic. I am not emotional. I am, as my father liked to say, the responsible one. What he meant was, I was useful. I was manageable. I did not cause scenes or make demands or require the kind of careful handling that my sister had always required. I was the daughter you could count on to show up, to stay late, to not ask questions. For 4 years, I had been doing the books for my parents' company. Let me explain what that means. My parents own a property management firm, residential and commercial, that manages roughly 80 units across 3 counties. Medium-sized, by industry standards. Comfortable. My father started it 20 years ago with a business partner who bought out his share a decade later, and since then my parents have run it together, my mother handling client relationships and my father handling acquisitions and contracts. They employ 6 people full-time. They live in a house with 4 bedrooms and a pool. They drove to my sister's engagement party in a car that cost more than my annual salary. 4 years ago, my father asked me to help sort through some paperwork during tax season. One weekend turned into every weekend. Every weekend turned into me coming in 3 evenings a week. 3 evenings a week turned into me effectively functioning as their bookkeeper, reconciling accounts, tracking receivables, preparing financial summaries, managing vendor invoices without a title, without compensation, and without ever being asked formally if this was something I wanted to do. It was simply assumed. I was the responsible one. Of course I would help. And I did. Because I loved them. Because I believed that this was what family did. Because every time I thought about asking to be paid, or asking for any kind of formal acknowledgement, I heard my father's voice in my head saying something he had said to me once when I was 17. "You're not the type to need a lot, Claire. That's a good thing about you." I had spent 12 years believing that was a compliment. The night of the Italy announcement, after everyone left and I had washed the dishes and wrapped the leftovers and wiped down the counters, I sat in my car in my parents' driveway for a long time. My sister had pulled me aside before she left, glowing, already talking about the Amalfi Coast and the hotel my parents had booked. She said, "You don't mind, right? You're so good at holding things together." She said it the way you say the sky is blue, not unkindly, just as a statement of established fact. She genuinely did not understand that it could be anything other than a compliment. I drove home. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table. And something that had been very quiet inside me for a very long time got loud. I need to be careful here, because I don't want to overstate what I knew or when I knew it. I am not going to tell you that I had been secretly planning anything, because that would not be true. What I had been doing, for about 18 months, was noticing. Just noticing. Keeping notes in a personal file on my laptop, the way you might jot down something odd you heard at a party, not accusation, just record. A vendor invoice that didn't match any vendor I could find in the system. A maintenance expense logged against a property that had been vacant for 6 months. Payroll entries for 2 employees I had never met, and whose names didn't appear on any HR documentation I had access to. Owner distributions that seemed disconnected from any profitability pattern I could identify. Each individual thing had an innocent explanation. Bookkeeping errors happen. Categorizations get messy. Small businesses run loose with documentation. I knew this. I told myself this. I filed my notes and kept doing the work and told myself I was probably missing context. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, I opened my laptop and looked at those notes for a long time. Then I called my friend Denise. Denise and I went to college together. She has a CPA license, an MBA, and a personality that I can only describe as forensic. She is the kind of person who, when you tell her something seems off, does not say, "I'm sure it's fine," she says, "Send me the files." I had never sent her the files. I had been too uncertain, too loyal, too afraid of what it might mean if I was right. I called her at 10:30 on a Tuesday night and I said, "I think I need you to look at something." She said, "I've been waiting for you to say that." I don't know what Denise saw in those first few documents I sent her, but she called me back within 40 minutes and her voice had a specific quality to it that I had never heard from her before. Careful, very controlled. She said, "Claire, I need you to not touch anything in those systems for right now. Don't delete, don't move, don't reorganize. Can you do that?" I said yes. She said, "I'm going to connect you with someone. A friend of mine. He does forensic accounting." I said okay. She said, "This is going to be important that you are methodical." The Italy trip was in 6 weeks. I want to tell you what I did during those 6 weeks, but first I want to tell you what I did not do. I did not confront anyone. I did not ask questions I wasn't supposed to be asking. I did not change my behavior in any way that would have been visible to anyone watching me. I came into the office on my usual evenings. I prepared the same summaries. I smiled at my mother when she brought me coffee. I listened to my sister talk about packing lists. I told my father, when he asked, that everything was running smoothly and not to worry. He patted my shoulder and said, "See? This is why you're the one I trust with this." I smiled. I said, "I'll take care of everything." Denise's contact was a man named Marcus. He did not work cheaply and he did not work quickly, but he worked very thoroughly. Over the course of those 6 weeks, with documents I had legitimate access to as the person who had been performing bookkeeping functions for 4 years, we built a picture that I will try to describe simply. There were 2 employees on payroll who did not exist. The money paid to them, approximately $4,000 a month each, was being redirected through a vendor account that resolved to a personal checking account. There were maintenance and repair expenses that, when traced to their supposed contractors, led to LLCs registered in my father's name and my mother's maiden name. The firm was billing its managed properties for services that had never been performed and keeping the difference before passing accounts to clients. And there was a pattern of cash transactions in the property acquisition records that suggested, to Marcus and later to 2 other people he brought in to review his work, a more serious problem involving funds that had no documented origin. The total estimated amount, across the period we were able to document, was just over $2 million. I remember Marcus saying that number to me over the phone. I remember sitting very still. I remember thinking about my father's voice saying, "You're not the type to need a lot, Claire." I remember thinking about 4 years of Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings, all of it unpaid. All of it given freely because I loved them, and because I believed that was what family did. I remember thinking, I have been paying for this without knowing it. The week before the Italy trip, I arranged 2 things. The first was a conversation with an attorney, a referral from Marcus who specialized in financial crimes and who walked me through what whistleblower protections looked like and what the process of reporting to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division would involve. The second was a call to my neighbor Janet, who has 2 rescue dogs of her own and who had offered more than once to watch my cat while I traveled. I mention this because I know someone will ask. I was not going anywhere. But I wanted the option and I wanted to be prepared. And I was not going to leave anything or anyone unattended. On the morning the family left for Italy, my parents, my sister, my future brother-in-law, both sets of their parents, several aunts and uncles, I stood in the driveway and hugged everyone and smiled and said, "Have the most wonderful time." My mother squeezed my hands and said she didn't know what she'd do without me. My sister was already on the phone. My father gave me the alarm code and the emergency contact number for the property management software and said, "You know what to do." I said, "I do." He got in the car. I watched the cars pull out of the driveway. I watched them turn the corner. I stood there for a moment in the quiet. Then I went inside. I sat at my parents' kitchen table, the same table where my father had said someone has to be the responsible one 6 weeks earlier, and I made the call that I had been preparing for and dreading and telling myself I would make for 6 weeks. I will not tell you it was easy. I will tell you it was the most certain I had ever felt about anything. The IRS criminal investigation tip line is not what movies have made you imagine. It is not dramatic. It is a process. You provide information, documentation, contact details. Marcus and the attorney had prepared everything in a structured format. The documentation package we submitted that morning was 114 pages. It included financial records, trace transaction flows, corporate registration documents, and a 12-page summary that Marcus had written in language designed to be immediately actionable. Then I waited. I went to the office every day that week, the way I was supposed to. I answered emails. I handled a maintenance request from a tenant in one of the commercial properties. I prepared the bi-weekly payroll. I did exactly what I had always done, which is to say I held everything together, except this time I was holding it together for a different reason. My sister sent me photos from Positano. My mother sent me a voice memo saying the pasta was unbelievable and that she was thinking of me. My father texted twice to ask about a specific contract renewal and seemed satisfied with my answers. To them, I was exactly what I had always been. Reliable. Steady. The one you didn't have to worry about. That was the part I had always misunderstood. The thing they called dependability, the thing they pointed to as my defining quality, the thing my father announced in front of 32 people as the reason I didn't get to go to Italy. It wasn't a reflection of who I was. It was a tool. It was something they had shaped in me over years because it was useful to them. Because a daughter who didn't make demands and didn't ask questions and showed up every Tuesday and Thursday without being asked was an extraordinarily valuable thing to have. The responsible one, the one without anywhere else to be. They had built that in me on purpose, and I had let them, because I called it love. I called it love for a very long time. The call came on a Thursday, 11 days after my family landed in Italy. It was from the attorney. He said that the CI division had been in contact and that things were progressing more quickly than typically expected. He said this in a measured tone that I understood to mean, what we submitted was significant enough to accelerate their interest. He told me that I should not discuss this with anyone, that I should continue normal operations and that I would be contacted again shortly. My family was due home in 4 days. I don't know exactly what happened on their end, or precisely when. What I know is that my parents landed at the airport on a Sunday afternoon, tanned and full of photographs and probably still tasting limoncello, and that by the time they reached their car in the long-term parking lot, they were met by people who were not there to carry their bags. I was not there. I found out through the attorney, who called me that evening to tell me that an arrest had been made and that I should expect the next several weeks to be complex. He used the word complex the way lawyers use words precisely, without drama, as a container for everything he wasn't going to say in a single phone call. He told me I had done the right thing. I thanked him. I sat on my couch for a while after I hung up, not crying exactly, just very quiet. My sister called me 40 minutes later. She was not quiet. She said things I will not repeat in detail, most of which centered on the word betrayal and on the certainty that I had destroyed the family. She said I had always been jealous of her. She said this was about the Italy trip, that I had done all of this because I wasn't invited to Italy. I let her talk. When she stopped, I said, I did not do this because of Italy. She said, then why? I said, because it was the right thing to do. She hung up. I have not spoken to her since. My mother called the next morning. That conversation was harder. My mother's voice had a quality I had not heard before, not angry, not accusatory, just hollowed out, like something weight-bearing had been removed and the structure above it was settling. She said, how could you do this to us? I said, Mom, I need you to understand that I didn't create this situation. I found it. There was a long silence. Then she said, you found it years ago, didn't you? It wasn't a question. I said, I need you to get an attorney. She did. That is the last piece of advice I gave to anyone in my family, and it was the only one that mattered. I want to tell you about the months that followed because I think the months that followed are the part that people usually leave out of stories like this, and it's the part that actually changed me. There was no single moment of triumphant clarity. There were federal proceedings. There was a period of about 3 months where I was interviewed multiple times and reviewed documents until I was exhausted in a way I had never been exhausted before, not physically but at some deeper level, something closer to the bones. There was the experience of watching my parents' assets being frozen and then inventoried and then partially seized. There was seeing the family house listed in a legal document as a seized asset, and feeling something about that I could not name, not satisfaction, not grief, something more complicated than either. There was also the whistleblower provision. This is the part that Marcus had flagged early and that the attorney had been careful to document properly. The IRS whistleblower program provides financial awards to individuals who report tax fraud resulting in the collection of taxes, penalties, and interest. The award is a percentage of the collected proceeds. The case, when it resolved nearly 14 months after that first call, had resulted in collections that qualified under the program's threshold. My award was awarded and processed approximately 8 months after the case resolution. I will tell you the number because I think it matters for people who are weighing whether to come forward with something they know. After legal fees and taxes on the award itself, I received approximately $840,000. I want to be honest about how that felt, because I think the honest answer is more interesting than what you might expect. It did not feel like winning. It did not feel like revenge. What it felt like, mostly, was a very strange kind of accounting the universe finally, awkwardly, producing a receipt for 4 years of Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings that had never been compensated. It felt like being handed back time that had already been spent. You can't unspend time. You can only decide what to do with what comes next. My father pleaded guilty to wire fraud and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 7 years. My mother, who the investigators determined had some knowledge of but limited active participation in the fraud, received a plea agreement that resulted in 3 years of supervised probation, a significant financial penalty, and the loss of her real estate license. The company, which had been operating under a managed receivership during the proceedings, was dissolved. My sister did not speak to me for 2 years. She reached out last spring, a text message, brief, saying that she had been in therapy and that she needed to say she was sorry for what she said the night of the arrests. I read it several times. I did not respond immediately. After about a week, I wrote back and said thank you and that I hoped she was doing well and that I needed more time. She said she understood. We have had 2 short phone calls since then. I don't know what we are to each other right now, and I think that is an honest place to be. I left the city 8 months after the case resolved. I used part of the award to take the time I needed, actual time, unmeasured, not structured around anyone else's calendar or needs. I traveled. I read. I slept more than I had slept in years. I took a course in forensic accounting that I had wanted to take for a long time and never had the space for. I started running, which sounds like a cliché, but I genuinely mean it as a practical fact. I started running, in the mornings, in cities where no one knew me, and it was one of the best things I have ever done. I am telling you this story not because I think revenge is a virtue. I don't. What I did was not revenge, it was a report. I want to be precise about that, because I think the distinction matters more than people usually allow. Revenge is about the other person. What I did was about the truth, and about 4 years of a version of myself that had been carefully constructed to be useful to other people at the cost of being honest about what I actually saw and knew and felt. The moment I made that call, I stopped being the responsible one in the way they meant it. I started being responsible in a way that was actually mine. There is something my attorney said to me early in the process that I have thought about often since. He said, the hardest part for most people isn't the legal risk. It's the grief. Because usually, by the time someone is ready to report something like this, they've already been grieving for a long time, they just didn't have a name for it. I didn't say anything when he said it, but I thought about it the whole drive home. I thought about the 12 years I had spent believing that being low maintenance was a compliment. I thought about the Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I thought about standing in my parents' driveway with a travel mug of coffee, watching everyone else's luggage get loaded into cars, being told that holding things down was my role in the family, and smiling, and meaning it, and not understanding yet the weight of what I was carrying. I had been grieving a long time. I just didn't have a name for it. I have it now. I want to say one more thing to whoever is watching this, because I know some of you are in a version of this story right now. Maybe it's not fraud. Maybe it's something quieter, the unpaid labor, the assumption that your time is always available, the public moment where someone said something about you in front of people who laughed and moved on while you held your face still and kept passing the bread. Maybe you've been noticing something in a file drawer or a bank statement or a family conversation, and you've been telling yourself you're probably missing context. Maybe you've been the responsible one for so long that you can no longer tell where the role ends and you begin. I am not going to tell you what to do. I am going to tell you that what I did was not quick, and it was not clean, and it cost me things that I still sometimes feel the weight of in the middle of the night. And I am going to tell you that I am the most free I have ever been. I own my time. I own my work. I own my mornings. I will never again stand in a driveway, smiling, watching other people drive away, telling myself that being left behind is the same thing as being trusted. That is not the same thing. It was never the same thing. I know that now.